hear me. Can everybody hear me in the back? Oh, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's great to have you here this morning. Welcome to Basic Military Genealogical Research. My name is Jeff Gambrone. I'm a historian here at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. I'm the Assistant Director of Reference Services. And just a little bit of background about myself. I have a BA in History from Mississippi State University, a Master's in History from Mississippi College, and my master's thesis was a regimental history of the 38th Mississippi Infantry CSA from the Civil War. And I've done a lot of military research over the years, and I'm just going to be going over some of the more basic military sources available here at the archive. For the most part, I'm going to stick to things that are available here. I will mention briefly items that are available elsewhere, but by and large, most of what I'm going to be talking about you can find in our reading room and in the archival and media reading rooms here at the archive. And if you have any questions, just fire them at me. I'll be glad to answer them as best I can. We do have to clear out of this room at 11 because there is another meeting due. But if you have any additional questions, I will be in the reading room afterwards. So just come on in and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. But to get started, let me get my, here we go. We're going to start with the American Revolution. And by the time of the American Revolution, there were really only two small settlements in what is today Mississippi. The Gulf Coast region and the area around Natchez, which were both part of the colony of British West Florida. You see here on the map. You've got Biloxi and Fort Panmure, which was at Natchez. That was basically your two settlements in what is today Mississippi. And so most of the men that fought in the American Revolution moved to Mississippi after the conflict ended. And this is a particular favorite print of mine. It's an illustration of the Battle of Bunker Hill. There were no Mississippi units that fought in the American Revolution. It was just simply too far from the action. And most of the men that fought in the Revolution ended up moving here long after the conflict ended. And they primarily came from southern states along the eastern seaboard. In particular, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia sent a lot of former veterans our way and ended up settling in Mississippi. And one of the primary sources that you're going to look for on American Revolutionary War soldiers is the soldier service record. Now, unfortunately, we do not have the service records available here at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Those are available at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And for those of you that don't want to wait, because the archives is unfortunately still closed because of COVID, those American Revolution service records are available on the pay website, fold3.com. If you've never used it, it's an excellent website for genealogical military research. And just to show you what a Revolutionary War service record looks like, this is what you're going to find. The first card is going to look like this. It's going to have the name of the soldier, which is James Adams, the unit he served in, 11th Pennsylvania Regiment, Revolutionary War, and then it's going to give you two ranks. The first rank is the rank they held when they joined the service. The second rank is the rank they held when they left the service. And then after that, you're going to have a number of cards like this. Oops. And these cards are generally going to cover about a 2-month time period, and they're taken from an original muster roll. These actual cards were made up years after the war. These were done by the government in the late 19th and early 20th century just to make the information on the original muster rolls more easily accessible to researchers. But they're going to tell you things like when the person enlisted, when they were paid, if they were ever sick and in the hospital, if they were wounded. Sometimes they'll tell you what battles they were in. There's a lot of information to be found in these service records. You never know exactly what's going to be in them until you actually pull them and go through them. But they can be quite informative. And to give you an idea, And this is another just great scene of the Revolutionary War. This is the surrender of General Burgoyne at Saratoga, New York. But this is what an original Revolutionary War muster roll looks like. This is where they took the information that they put on those individual cards. And you can see why they wanted to make it into a more accessible form. In a lot of cases, these muster rolls are huge. They're like so big, and they take up an entire desk. And it's just a lot easier reading the information off an individual card than it is trying to decipher it off of one of these huge muster rolls, which in many cases are quite fragile anyway and don't need to be handled. This is another great scene I like. This is the Battle of Long Island at New York, August 1776. And while the Mississippi Department of Archives and History does not have the Revolutionary War service records themselves, we do have the Index to Compiled Service Records of Revolutionary War Soldiers on microfilm. And like the service records, these cards were compiled many years after the war, and they only give the information, they give the name of the soldier and the unit they served in. The basic function of these cards is just to verify a relative service so that you can then send for the service record. But this is what they're going to look like on microfilm. And you can see the quality is somewhat lacking. The microfilm is rather dated, but it's still legible. So you can find the name of the soldier, the unit they served in and rank out. So this way you can request a copy of this soldier's individual service record, either from the National Archives, or you can just go to old3.com and get a subscription and download a copy of it from them. And like the service records, Revolutionary War pension applications for veterans of the Revolutionary War will also be found at the National Archives. We don't have them here. But what we do have is the Index to Revolutionary War pensions in book form, so that you can look up and see if your relative filed for a pension, and then you can request it from the National Archives. We also have available a publication entitled The Mississippi Genealogical Exchange. And beginning in Volume 1, Number 1, which is March 1955, and continuing in subsequent issues, it contains printed abstracts of pensions drawn by Revolutionary War soldiers and their widows that settled in Mississippi. And this is the front page of Volume 1, Number 1, where the pensions start. And then this is how they're listed. And these pensions have quite a bit of information in them. They give you the person served in, their name, what county they were filing in, and then it tells you a brief synopsis of their service, and then when they were added to the pension roll. So you can find some really good information about the soldiers. And we have all of these available in the reading room of the archive. And now we're going to move to our next conflict, which is the War of 1812. And this is a great illustration of the Battle of New Orleans. I love this picture. And the Mississippi Territory, as it was at that time, sent a number of units to fight in the War of 1812. And this illustration is the Fort Mills Massacre of 1813, in which a number of Mississippians were involved. And service records for soldiers that took part in the War of 1812 can be found on microfilm here at the archives. And the names are in alphabetical order by unit. The names of Mississippians who fought in the War of 1812 can also be found in the book Defenders of the Old Southwest by Grady Howard. So if you want to look up and see if your relative fought in the War of 1812, that's a good place to start. And then if you find him listed, just make note of his unit, and then you can look up the actual service record on microfilm in our media reading room. And the actual service records are going to look like this. And I pulled this specific soldier's record, Isaac Seltzer, for a reason, because that's my great-great-great-grandfather. lived in southwest Hinds County. In fact, he's buried there. But it just gives you the soldier's name, the unit he served in, which in this case was the 7th Battalion, Perkins Regiment, Mississippi Militia. Gives you his rank when he entered the service, which is sergeant, his rank when he left the service, which is sergeant major, which means he got a promotion during the time he was in service. And then after that will be the individual cards, and there are a number of them. This is just an example of one of them, showing that he's on a company muster roll for September of 1815, and then under remarks it says promoted to sergeant major October 20th, 1814. And you just never know what you're going to find in these service records. Every time you do it, it's a treasure hunt. Sometimes you can find some really detailed information about your relative's service. Other times it can be rather sparse. You never know until you actually pull it up and look at it. And then the pensions for War of 1812 veterans, we don't have the actual pensions here. Those are available at the National Archives, but we do have the 2-volume book index that lists all of the War of 1812 pensioners. And that is available here. You can see if your relative filed for a pension, and if he did, you can send off and get a copy of it. And then this is our next conflict, the Mexican War. And this is a great illustration. This is General John Quitman of Mississippi leading the victorious U.S. troops into Mexico City in 1848. And Mississippi sent 2 regiments and several independent companies to fight in the Mexican War. And Mexican War service records, we do have those on microfilm here at the archive. And again, they're going to look very similar to the ones you've already seen from other conflicts. This is an example, Reuben M. Downing, Company G, 1st Mississippi Infantry, Mexican War. He was a captain when he went in, he was a captain when he came out. And I just included a picture here of his grave. Captain Downing died in 1853 in a yellow fever epidemic. And I grew up looking at this tombstone every day. It was right beside my house. And I grew up in Bolton, Mississippi. He was buried in the Bolton Family Cemetery. This tombstone was one of the things that really sparked my interest in military history, because his tombstone is just a monument to the Mexican War. In fact, inscribed on the other side, it says, "A bright star at Buena Vista and Monterey that can only be steeled by death." Yeah, I was fortunate enough to meet one of his descendants some years ago, and she actually showed me a picture of him, and still had one of his spurs that he wore in Mexico, which is really neat to see a personal artifact from someone's grave, from someone whose grave I looked at every day growing up. But in addition to the service records that we have on microfilm for the Mexican War, we also have in the Mississippi Genealogical Exchange, beginning in Volume 5, Number 2, which is June 1959, a list of pensioners that were receiving pensions from the Mexican War that lived in Mississippi. The actual pensions are going to be at the National Archives, but you can look in that pension list, see if your relative did file for a pension. If he did, then you know to go ahead and request a copy of it from the National Archives. And the units that served in Mississippi, the primary ones, the 1st Mississippi Infantry, which is the unit commanded by Colonel Jefferson Davis, the 2nd Mississippi Infantry, which arrived in Mexico too late to see any action. They mostly did occupation duty. And then the Anderson Rifles, also known as the 1st Battalion Mississippi Rifles, also served in that conflict. And we do have all of their service records on microfilm. Another very useful item that we have, and this is a great illustration of the Battle of Monterey, in which a number of Mississippians took part with the 1st Mississippi Regiment. But we have Mexican War grave registration cards, and these document known Mexican War burials in the state of Mississippi. These are almost all post-war men that died well after the war ended. But you can see they give you the name of the veteran, where they lived, the next of kin, and where they lived, the date the person was born, the date they died. Usually it will give you the name of the cemetery and even sometimes give you a location. Like this gives you the section, township, and range in Ottawa County where the cemetery was located. It even gives you the lot and the block number. Tells you the branch of service they were in, and then sometimes gives you additional remarks like informational marker says Major W.W. Howell, February 1st, 1822 to July 8th, 1909. And it also says he has a private stone, one paid for by his family, most likely. But these grave registration cards are on microfilm. They're available in the media reading room, and they're just simply arranged in alphabetical order by name. And this is a great illustration. Now we're getting to the Civil War. And this is probably the conflict we actually have the most documentation on. And this is a picture of John Cherry, who was a member of the 3rd Mississippi Infantry, CSA. And I chose this picture specifically because he was from my hometown of Bolton, Mississippi. He was a member of the Downing Rifles. He was killed at the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee in November 1864, carrying the regiment's battle flag. He was shot down on the works at Franklin. And then here we have Private E.M. Cunningham, who was a member of the 4th Mississippi Infantry, African descent. He was a native Mississippian. He lived in Pike County, and he served in one of the USCT regiments, United States Colored Troops, which over 17,000 Mississippians of African American descent served in USCT regiments during the Civil War. And this is a great shot of the monument to the USCT soldiers who served in the Vicksburg campaign. This is in the Vicksburg National Military Park. And the Mississippi Department of Archives and History has on microfilm the service records of one white regiment that fought for the Union from the state of Mississippi, the 1st Battalion, Mississippi Mounted Rifles. And then it also has the service records for some of the 17,000 African American soldiers who also fought for the Union in USCT regiments. And again, you'll see there's service records that look very much like the others you've seen. Name, company, regiment, rank in, rank out. Now, the service records we have are for the 3rd United States Colored Cavalry, and this is a great illustration of that unit bringing Confederate prisoners into Vicksburg in 1864. I love that illustration. And in addition to the service records for the 3rd Cavalry, we also have service records for the 5th United States Colored Heavy Artillery, which was stationed at Vicksburg, and the 6th United States Colored Heavy Artillery that was stationed at Natchez. We don't have the service records for the infantry regiments. Those are available from the National Archives. They're also available on the pay website fold3.com if you can't wait. But we do, however, have an index listing all of the African American soldiers that served from every state of the Union in a 2-volume index that's available in the reading room. And then pensions for U.S. soldiers that served in the Civil War, we don't have those here at the archive. Those are going to be available at the National Archives. There is, however, an index showing who filed for a pension available for free on the free genealogy website, familysearch.org. And then this is a great illustration of the Battle of Rice's Crossroads, one of the fiercest battles that took place in Mississippi in 1864. And compiled service records for Mississippians who served in Confederate units. Again, you're going to see the similar format with name, company, regiment, rank in, rank out. We have those service records available on microfilm in the media room. In addition, we also have the pensions available that Confederate veterans would have been eligible for starting in the 1880s. And those are on microfilm as well. And in addition, these have been digitized and are available on our website in the digital archives. And these pensions can really be great because they do give you a lot more detail about an individual soldier's service. They can ask their name, their age, where they're living at the time they file for the pension, what unit they joined, when they joined it, if they were ever wounded, were they with the regiment when it surrendered. If they were wounded, it asks usually how that has impacted them, because generally invalid soldiers got a larger pension than someone that was just filing because of old age. These pensions can be a great source of information on a relative's Civil War service. And we do have a 3-volume index for these pensions available in book form. It's in the media room, and it's available to the patrons. You can look it up, see if your soldier's listed. All the names are just alphabetical by last name. And you can see if the soldier or his widow, because widows were eligible for a widow's pension if they did remarry. So sometimes it'll be the veteran who filed, sometimes it'll be the veteran's widow that filed. And if you find that they're listed, you can either look the pension record up on the microfilm version in the media room, or you can go to our digital archive online and look it up from the comfort of your home. And just a great source of information. And then another very useful source, the Mississippi Confederate grave registration cards. These are just like the ones you saw for the Mexican War. Gives you the name of the soldier, his home address, next of kin, when he was born, where, date of death, and then it gives you the location of the cemetery, then what unit they served in, what branch of service, when they enlisted, and when they were discharged. So if you're looking for the location of a burial of a relative, the grave registration index, our cards can be very useful. These are on microfilm, and there is a 2-volume book index listing all of the men that are on these cards. It's available in the reading room. You can look and see if one of your relatives is listed. If they are, then you can go to the microfilm and you can make a copy of their individual grave registration card. And a lot of people don't realize it, but the state of Mississippi also offered pensions to the former slaves that served Confederate soldiers during the war. And this is a good example. This is Sergeant A.M. Chandler of Company F, 44th Mississippi Infantry, with his family slave, Silas Chandler, who went to war with him. And someone like Silas would have been eligible for a state pension because he had served as a slave to a Confederate soldier. And there is a finding aid for these records on our online catalog, and it looks like this. You just put in last name, first name, and you can also add county if you know it. If you don't, you can just leave that blank and it'll just pull up everybody. And then it'll give you the index listing, if they find them, what the name of the person, what county they were living in when they applied, the date they applied, when they were in service as a servant to a Confederate soldier, and usually the unit that their master was attached to. And then if you find them listed there in the index, you can pull a copy of the actual pension from the microfilm or from the digital archive, because these are included with all of the Confederate pensions that are available in our digital archive. Now we get to the Spanish-American War. And this is a great shot of Colonel Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders at the top of San Juan Hill. And there were 3 regiments raised from Mississippi for the Spanish-American War. Unfortunately, none of them made it overseas before the conflict ended. In fact, the only Mississippians that went overseas in great numbers, there were a number of men from the state that served in a regiment raised directly into federal service, the 5th Immune Regiment, and they did make it over to Cuba in time to become occupation troops. In fact, one of them was James K. Vardaman, who later became governor of the state. He was an officer in the 5th U.S. Immune Regiment. And service records for Mississippians that served in the Spanish-American War are going to be at the National Archives. But we have here extracts from those service records on microfilm. And they look like this. And they're going to give you the basic synopsis of the person's service. His name, rank, where he was from, the unit he served in, when he enlisted, and where the officer that enlisted him, where he was mustered into service, and then gives you just a brief synopsis of that service. Like this soldier apparently got into some trouble because it looks like he was tried by court-martial and sentenced to 17 days confinement. But it's going to give you just a good overview of the individual soldier's service. And I included this as well, this just because it's kind of neat. This is the sword that James K. Vardaman carried in the Spanish-American War. We actually have this sword in our collections in the museum division. And if you've never seen it, there's a beautiful monument put up by the Spanish-American War veterans that's on the side of the War Memorial Building, just across the street over here. But the individual extracts from the service record basically include name, rank, residence, regiment and company, enrollment date, date of mustering in, extracts of service, and the date of mustering out. And now we come to World War I. And I took this great shot. This is one of the sculptures that's out in front of the War Memorial Building that was built right after World War I as a monument to the men that went to fight from the state of Mississippi in World War I. And there were thousands of Mississippians that did serve in that conflict. And this is the War Memorial Building right here. And one of the most useful items that we have related to the service of Mississippians who served in World War I are the Statement of Service cards. And Congress passed a law in 1919 that authorized the Secretary of War for the Army and the Secretary of the Navy for the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard to provide each state with a Statement of Service cards for all of its service members that mustered into service during World War I. These cards were prepared over the next 7 years, and they were finally completed in 1926. And these cards, which look like this, they give an abbreviated history of the soldier's service during World War I. They include the name of the service member, birth and residency information, ranks held and dates of promotion, units and dates assigned, and type and date of discharge. And they can also include remarks if the person was wounded, if they were in the hospital. Very often that will be listed as well. So there's some very useful information to be found in these Statement of Service cards. And it's a good thing these were done because the actual service records themselves are at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. And unfortunately, they had a fire. 1973. And most of the Army records for World War I and World War II were either damaged or destroyed. And if you contact them today, well, first off, you're not going to have any luck right now because they're closed because of COVID. But when they reopen, if you do call them trying to get a copy of an Army service record, they're more than likely going to tell you it was lost in the fire. The good news is if your relative was in the Navy, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard, those records were stored separately. They survived. And you can get service records for those individuals. And this was the service record for Luther Manship of Manship House fame. And that was his family. And we even have, in addition, in our collections of the museum division, this is the uniform he wore during World War I. That's in the collections next door. And then another very useful item, this is the monument to Mississippi's unknown war dead that's in the center of the courtyard at the War Memorial Building across the street. I just love that monument. But in addition to Statement of Service cards, we also have on microfilm the draft registration cards that every Mississippian of war service age had to fill out. There is an index to those registration cards. It's in book form and it is available in our reading room. But the actual cards look like this. Usually it's 2 pages. Gives you the name of the soldier, or in this case sailor. I chose this one on purpose again. This was my grandfather. Lindley Creighton Adams. Gives his age, where he was living at the time he registered for the draft, which was Brandon, his date of birth, whether he was a natural born citizen or a resident alien, or if he had become a naturalized citizen, where he was born, what his occupation is, who his boss is, where his employment is located, ask if he has any dependents, ask if he's married or single, if he's white or black, if he's ever had previous military service, and then it also gives a description: medium height, medium build, light brown hair, or light eyes. So these World War I draft registration cards can be very useful, and we do have them available on microfilm and the media reading room. Okay, now we get to our last conflict of the talk, World War II. And I chose this image. This is Jake W. Lindsay of Wayne County. He was the recipient of the Medal of Honor for Valor during World War II. I love this image. He actually became an officer after receiving the Medal of Honor, and after a few years, he asked for a demotion back down to an NCO because he felt he could do more good for the Army as an NCO. And he served out the remainder of his time in the Army as a sergeant. Just thought that was an interesting little tidbit about his service. And this is a great image taken down at Camp Shelby of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. These are Japanese soldiers, mostly from Hawaii and from California. They trained at Camp Shelby and they went on to serve in the European theater, and they were one of the most highly decorated unit of World War II. They were some tough fighters. Just a great image. And this is a uniform we have in our holdings in the museum division. It's a World War II uniform coat known as an Eisenhower jacket. This belonged to George C. Sargent of Bentonia, Mississippi. He served in the U.S. Army from 1944 to 1946 and was a member of Company D of the 3rd Armored Division and was involved in battles of the Ardennes, Rhineland, and Central Europe. And Mississippi Department of Archives and History doesn't have a lot of records related to World War II. The actual service records, if they still survive, are going to be at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. And unfortunately, if you contact them once they reopen, they're probably going to tell you they were destroyed in the 1973 fire. Now, if your relatives were in the Navy, Marines, or Coast Guard, again, you're in luck. Those records are stored separately, and they have survived. So you can get copies of them. But if you're in the Army, more than likely, they're going to tell you that the records were destroyed. But fortunately, there are some things available that can give you some details of your relative's service. And one of the best ones that we have here at the archive is going to be a copy of the soldier's discharge papers. And this is an example. And again, I pulled one from my own family history. This is my dad's discharge paper. Gives his name, the unit he was serving in, the time he was discharged, his serial number, his rank, the unit he was serving in. Tells you what campaigns he took part in this case, Ardennes, Rhineland, Central Europe. Gives you the medals that he was issued. Tells you even down to when he got his inoculations. Tells you when he went overseas, when he came back to the United States. And just a great source on the basic information about your relative's service. And the nice thing is, when soldiers came home, they were advised to register copies of these discharges at their county courthouse in the county in which they resided. And we have a number of these at the archive on microfilm. We don't have every county. You have to check in our catalog to see, but we have them for a lot of counties. If your county is one of the ones we don't have, check with the courthouse. They should still have the original documents, but we have quite a number of these on microfilm available in the media room. And in addition, we've got a lot of books written about World War II soldiers on the local level. Things like Noxubee County World War II Memories, or World War II Tippecanoians in Service, 1941 to 1947. And you want to check our online catalog, because there's lots of these kinds of small town and small county or county unit histories that give a lot of detail about local soldiers. And then one other source that can be a real treasure trove of information about a soldier, and again, this is a picture of my dad, taken in Vicksburg in probably 1944, right after he'd entered the service. And newspapers are a great source of information on a soldier's World War II service. Newspapers really kept up with their local soldiers, and you'd find things like home front news. There used to be a section in the paper where they would give news about soldiers that were serving. Like, this is an example. I found this in the Hinds County Gazette. J.T. Van Brum left for Camp Shelby today, June 30th, and we wish him luck. And then I also found this. In fact, this is how I figured out what unit my dad was in. By the time I got around to asking him, he didn't exactly remember. And by finding this little blurb in the paper, I found out he served in Troop B, 18th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron Mechanized. And from there, I was able to find out more information about his unit and exactly where he served. So we've got tons of newspapers from Mississippi on microfilm in the media room. And also, a lot of digitized papers are available for free through the Chronicling America newspaper project at Library of Congress. You can access those through any computer. They're downloadable, and there's a lot of Mississippi papers available there. Also, if you go in our media reading room, we also have access to another newspaper site, newspapers.com. That's a pay site, but if you use it here at the archive, it's free. And it has even more Mississippi newspapers that you can search looking for World War II information about your relatives. And that brings me to the end of my talk. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you. If not, I will be in the reading room after this talk ends. And if you want to come in and talk, or if you have questions about any of the resources I talked about today, I'll be happy to point them out to you, show you how to use them. And thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I will say we are planning on having other talks throughout the years on other subjects related to Mississippi genealogy. So just keep an eye out for those. We will have them posted on our website, and they'll be coming up in coming months. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
I got tons of questions. All right. I have two questions right away. First, I think it's my fourth great grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War, but he wasn't a regular army. He was like a militia person. And so and he didn't fight in Mississippi, he fought in New York. Do you have records that would help on that? And then the second one, let me ask my second question and you can answer both. My third great grandfather fought in the Battle of Lundy's Lane in the War of 1812. And it's in one of his son's obituaries that said that, but I can't find any records on his service record. So I'm trying to see what you think on that as well.
Okay, your first question was...
He fought in the militia, not in a regular...
What state did he serve in?
New York.
I would start by contacting the New York State Archive. If he didn't move to Mississippi, we're probably not going to have anything on him here, but I would start by contacting the New York State Archive, and if they don't have anything, then contact the National Archives. But if he served in the state militia, more than likely, if his service record still survives, it's going to be at the New York State Archive.
Okay.
And then your second question was about the Battle of Lundy's Lane.
Right, in War of 1812.
Yeah. What state did your relative serve from?
He was, I think it was New York, and then he moved to Illinois.
Okay. Did he serve in a state unit?
No, he was a colonel, so I think he fought in, probably in New York, probably.
Okay, again, I would first contact the New York State Archive, but I would also check with the Illinois State Archive. But if for War of 1812, if he got a pension, it's going to be a federal pension. Now, we do have the index for all of the federal pensions from the War of 1812 here. You can check and see if he filed for a pension, because those are nationwide. So you can check. If he did file for a pension, you can get a copy of it from the National Archives.
Okay. And that's in the book?
Yeah, it's a 2-volume set,
Okay.
and I'll be happy to point those out to you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
What was the population of Mississippi during the American Revolution?
You know, it's been so long since I've seen any numbers on that. It would have been very small.
You're talking hundreds?
Probably less than 50,000.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've seen any firm numbers, but it would have been small.
And who had-
You basically only had 2 real outposts, and Mississippi was very much the wilderness at that time. Natchez and Biloxi were it, and they were tiny.
And they were
a lot of indigenous people, though.
Yeah. Oh yes. Well, still lots of Native Americans.
And governmentally, they were under control of the British at that
Yeah, it was part of British West Florida, which remained loyal to England throughout the conflict.
One thing about Mississippi Confederate pensions, you have to have served in a Mississippi unit to get one. Or
No.
you moved in from out of state.
If you moved in from out of state after the war, you were eligible for a pension. You just had to show proof of it. Very often they would write back to the state in which the person had served and confirm their service. But yes, you were eligible for a pension no matter which state you served in, as long as it was honorable.
Around too. So if you moved from Mississippi, you can get a pension in another state.
Yes, most of the other southern states would honor the service no matter what state it was in.
Yeah.
So if you moved from Mississippi, say to Texas or to Georgia, they would honor that and honor your service, and they would grant you a pension. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I got my great-grandfather's enlistment record, and it has all the abbreviations, like the, like COT.C, UPO, blah, blah, blah. How do I know exactly where he was?
Which conflict?
World War I.
And you're trying to figure out where he served?
Right.
And let's take a look here.
With all the abbreviations down there, how do you know exactly how to find out where he was?
And was he a Mississippian?
Yes.
I would look up his statement of service card, because that's going to tell you where he served. The enlistment record is not going to tell you, because this would have been filled out at the time he joined up, so he hadn't gone anywhere yet.
Okay.
But his actual statement of service card will tell you where he served.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other locations in the state that are similar to MDAH that have information like this, like Shelby or something like that? Camp Shelby?
You can check at the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum, which is located at Camp Shelby. That's an excellent resource. I would check a lot of your local historical societies in the areas where the men served, particularly also the local libraries will very often have like a reading room that has genealogy and other research available. So yeah, I would look for those local and county sources, libraries, historical societies, that sort of thing. Because very often they will have some very good local information that you're not going to find anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I already asked one. This is what I was going to think of. I thought we ran across this. I know we have records of people Confederate veterans who were at Beauvoir, who was a Confederate veterans home. Were there any other kind of records like that? Or were there any other Confederate veterans homes?
There was a veterans home in Vicksburg called the Confederate Annex, and there are surviving records for it. And that was the only other major one I know of besides Beauvoir. There may have been a few other very small ones, but the only one of any size that I know of was the Confederate Veterans Annex in Vicksburg. Yes, sir.
The World War II discharges, military discharges, that's only available on microfilm? It's not online?
No, it's not online. They're available on microfilm and in the original books at the county courthouse.
Okay.
Because what we have are copies of the ones that were sent to the courthouses and filed at the courthouses. But you can check online in our online catalog to see if we have discharges available for the particular county your relative lived in. Any other questions? Well, if not, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And
If somebody was in ROTC in another state and then moved to Mississippi, would that be on record possibly?
if it was ROTC, no. Unless they actually went to active duty,
Yes, sir.
there might be a record, but it's not going to be at the state level. It's probably going to be National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis.
Okay. I know my great-grandfather, he was in ROTC, I think at LSU, and then he served active duty and then moved to Mississippi.
Yeah, and I would check with the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis. That's where his records are going to be. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I will be available in the reading room if you want to come talk.
You need our card, right?